Let's talk Ole Miss football, Neal. Good to have you on our channel. It's the first time, and I hope this is the first of many. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. Appreciate
All right, Neal. So you have been with Rivals for how long?
it. 14 years now, which is
Wow.
a long time. It's hard to believe how time flies.
Yes. And in the 14 years you've been covering the team, what's the feeling this offseason as we head into the season compared to others? Is average, above average?
No, it's probably above average. I've covered some really good Ole Miss teams. I've covered some really god awful Ole Miss teams, and a little bit of everything in between. I think this is a team coming off of a 10-3 season, a 6-2 SEC mark, and they went to the Sugar Bowl, and um, there's a lot of confidence around the program. It's Lane Kiffin's third year. I think he's got more and more of his guys, not only from a coaching staff standpoint, but also from a roster standpoint. So I think there's some comfort and familiarity there inside the program. I think it's a talented roster. It's a deeper roster. It looks more like an SEC team than it's probably looked since about 2015. But they certainly have some question marks because, coming into last season, I think expectations were pretty high, as they should have been. But a lot of that was, you had Matt Corral
Oh,
on
yeah.
that team. Of course, you knew what you had there. They had a very experienced offense returning. You had a defense that was anchored by Sam Williams. Chance Campbell had come in from Maryland. I think people felt like he had a real chance to stabilize the defense, which he did. Chance looked terrific for the Tennessee Titans last night in a preseason game. So, they're replacing some key guys on that team, but there's a lot of candidates to do it. So I think it's a pretty optimistic offseason.
Well, it always starts at quarterback, and you mentioned Corral's gone. It's a big loss, but Jackson Dart is the big name. He comes over from USC, and I know there were a lot of USC fans that preferred Dart over Slovis when they had that battle going on in USC. So they like Dart. How's Dart looking so far from what you've seen? And does he have the opportunity? Is he the type of talent that he could have a special year if it all goes well?
See, this is what's so interesting is people outside of here just crown Dart by default.
Oh, I like it.
And I think Jackson has a real shot to be the starting quarterback.
Okay.
But Ole Miss has a scrimmage Saturday, another scrimmage next Saturday. I think those scrimmages are going to be really big. If you watch practice, and I know you haven't had that opportunity, I have. They're close. It's Jackson Dart, Luke Altmaier. Luke played. He's the one that came in last season in the Sugar Bowl when Corral went down with the ankle injury in the first quarter. And look, I'm not the biggest media fan in the world. We have a tendency in media to be really lazy, and people labeled Matt Corral as not Matt Corral, Luke Altmaier as, oh well, he's not very good. He came in off the bench against one of the best defenses in the country in a Sugar Bowl game. That was his first real college experience. If you have super high hopes in that scenario, I commend your optimism, but I suspect that life is going to pour cold water in your face.
Yeah.
Luke, they're different quarterbacks. Luke is a little more conservative, a little more cautious. They want him to push the envelope a little bit. Jackson Dart, on the other hand, a little bit more of a not gunslinger, but a little bit more aggressive,
Yeah.
a little bit more of a risk taker.
That's why the fans like him.
But they like to rein that in. You don't win in this league throwing interceptions, and at practice, Dart probably makes more big plays than Altmaier, but Dart makes more mistakes than Altmaier, almost routinely. So the scrimmage Saturday will be big. The scrimmage next Saturday will be big. The way the schedule sets up, they've got some time early in the season to iron some things out, to figure it out before they get into the meat of their schedule. So, look, if you made me bet on who the quarterback was going to be, I'd probably bet on Dart, but there are people inside the program who believe it will be Altmaier. I mean, I don't believe that decision has been made as we record this.
Do you think, and by the way, this is why we have you on the show, to correct any potential mistakes on the roster before, because again, it's very difficult without preseason games, even for anybody outside the area to really know what's going on. So,
Sure.
but that's why they
Sure.
have to follow you guys over on Rivals, rebelgrove.com, to get all of the Ole Miss information, which I'm sure a lot of Ole Miss diehard fans are up to, but people who are not Ole Miss fans like
Sure.
me outside the area, this is why it's very important. And what I okay, so if Dart wins the job, though, from what you know about Kiffin, is he going to have a short leash?
No, Lane's talked about that. He knows that that's a different position. It's not like, a defensive end makes a bust and you can yank him off the field and yell at him for a minute and throw him back out there. It's different. Quarterback's different. I think you saw a lot about what Lane Kiffin, how he runs quarterbacks in 2020 with Matt Corral. Ole Miss went up to Fayetteville. That was that COVID year, which was so hard to remember exactly when the schedule
Yeah.
was. It was fairly early in the year. The game was, I guess, in October, and Matt had 6 interceptions and a loss in Fayetteville. And there was a lot of people calling for Kiffin to pull him during that game, after that game. Put John Rice Plumlee in, they said. And Lane didn't do that. Instead, when the game was over, the first thing he did was go into the locker room and tell Corral, hey, look, you're my quarterback. We got to figure this out. We got to get better, but you're my guy. And Matt's career, really, from that point forward, just kind of skyrocketed. And so I think when he wants to pick a quarterback, he doesn't want to go into the season with 2 quarterbacks. I think he wants to pick one and stick with him. But now look, whether it's Corral, whether it's Dart, whether it's Altmaier, Ole Miss is going to take a step back at quarterback. And Lane has said this, and he's exactly right. We have a tendency, all of us, whether we're in media or whether you're fans or whatever, we have a tendency to take talent like that for granted.
Sure.
And Matt didn't make many bad throws last season. He made a ton of great throws. He was very accurate. He was elite with the deep ball, especially before the ankle injury. And they're going to take a step back. It's going to take a minute. Both of these guys, Luke Altmaier's 19. He turns 20 the day that Ole Miss plays LSU in late October. Jackson Dart will play this entire season as a 19-year-old. He won't. Jackson Dart won't turn 20 until May. These are 2 young guys who their best football's in front of them, and whoever gets this job, they're going to have some growing pains this season that probably will resemble Matt Corral's growing pains in 2020.
Good problem to have if you're a college head coach.
Yeah. Absolutely. You want talented guys, but yeah, there's a difference between a third-year quarterback and a first-year quarterback.
Sure.
There just is. Bryce Young was an anomaly.
The running game, now there have been some good runners with the program. Even Ely last year was a top runner and a top weapon. But now Zachary Evans comes over from TCU. So expectations appear to be pretty high on his talent. And also Bentley, the transfer, comes over. And that's the other storyline of this program this season, this offseason, were all the key transfers that Lane was able to bring in. And these are 2 of them, 2 big ones.
Yeah. We just talked about Jackson Dart. He's a transfer. They've got two transfer running backs, the guys you just mentioned. They also have Kentrell Bullock, who's back from last season, who inside the program people are really excited about. And then they have a freshman, Quinshon Judkins, who, look, I hate being the hype guy. I don't like doing this to young guys, but he's got a chance to be special. He does everything, and I feel better saying that because the kids on the team talk about him in the same.
Okay, I like it.
So I think they've got a chance to be really good at running back. Evans is that complete back who can do everything. It's a matter of whether he can stay healthy. Bentley is the speedster who does really well in space, which is kind of Lane Kiffin's forte, is utilizing the weapons that he has. And then you've got the other guys. So there's some depth there. I think they probably go into the season more comfortable with their running game than they are with their passing game. There's probably no bigger misnomer about Lane Kiffin than he's some pass-happy, wide-open, air raid guy. He's not. Yeah. Lane is a guy who builds offenses around who does what well. And if this team ends up being a running team that's kind of run heavy, run oriented, I won't be at all surprised, especially early in the season as you try to ease whoever the quarterback is into some sort of a comfort zone.
All right. The weapons, as far as the receivers, Mingo, I believe he's the top returning wide receiver.
Yeah.
And then the transfers.
Yep.
So who's looking good, or what are you hearing as far as who we should possibly keep an eye on?
Malik Heath, the transfer from Mississippi State, has had a great camp so far. Jonathan Mingo, you mentioned him, coming off of a foot injury last season. They had to redo the operation in the spring. He looks healthy. I think everyone's kind of holding their breath cautiously there because you know how it is with feet injuries. Feet are complicated. Jalen Robinson, a transfer from UCF, looks terrific in the slot. I think he's going to potentially be a big part of their offense. Jordan Watkins is a transfer from Louisville. I think he's going to be a guy that they target a lot. They have Jalen Knox, who sat out last year after transferring from Missouri. They have high hopes for him. They've had a hard time keeping him healthy. They got a couple of other returners, Braylon Brown, Dennis Jackson, guys that I think they would love to see something from. Then they have J.J. Henry, who redshirted a year ago, who I think could, at the very minimum, give them some depth in the slot. They've got a bunch of weapons, potentially. What they would really love is to see 2-3 of those guys, kind of step forward and be consistent guys that can be stars. And I think your leading candidates for that are Heath and Robinson and Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah, because they had some really explosive receivers over the last few years. Me being a Jet fan, I'm very familiar with one of them.
Yeah, Elijah Moore was terrific, and they continue to try to replace Elijah Moore, which is an almost impossible thing. I think Robinson is the closest thing they've had to Elijah in the couple of years since he left. I'm not ready to put that tag on him. I mean, what made Elijah Moore so special in Kiffin's offense was that you could put him in the slot, you could put him out wide, you could put him in motion, you could put him in the backfield. You could just do so many things with him because of his versatility and his quickness and his explosiveness that it really gave Lane an elite kind of weapon. And I think Robinson has a chance to be that, but again, you got to. Yeah, that's rarefied air. I mean, Elijah was a terrific college player.
Okay, the offensive line, it's always important. 4, I believe, starters are back. And if that's the case, how is it looking? An average unit, above average?
No, I think it should be above average. I think it's got a chance to be a really good starting front. Depth, like it is at a lot of places. Depth is an issue. If they get banged up, things could get a little squirrely pretty fast. But their starting unit, they've moved Jeremy James from right tackle to left tackle. They've moved Nick Broker, who was a starting left tackle for a couple of years. They've moved him inside to guard. I think that is a move that is designed to sort of amplify his professional stock. Okay. He'll play inside at the NFL level. So he thought about going pro. I think this was kind of a, hey, come back. We'll let you play the position that you'll play at the next level. Show people what you can do. Caleb Warren's at center. A little new there, moved over from guard, still kind of adjusting to some of the snaps, but that continues to get better and better as camp goes along. Probably won't be a problem. Eli Acker stepped in at right guard middle of last season when Ben Brown went down with the injury. I think Eli's got a pretty bright future. And then Mason Brooks is a transfer from Western Kentucky who's come in at right tackle, really solidified that starting group. At tight end, they've got a couple of guys, Casey Kelly, Chad Kelly's younger brother, played a lot last season. He's kind of the blocking tight end. Michael Trigg transferred over from USC, guy with a tremendous ceiling, got a lot of kind of growing up to do still. Young guy, he's 18, 19 years old. A weapon, but I don't know. His best football still probably a year or two in front of him. So they're good up front, really good up front. They've got a couple of backups that they like. Reese McIntyre, a kid named Jaden Williams. Probably the left tackle of the future, who's probably getting close to being ready to play at this level. Okay. So if something happened, they probably feel pretty good about him. And then after that, it's touch and go on some of the young guys. They've got some guys they like that they still probably aren't ready to see them go through the fires of the SEC. But listen, outside of Alabama and Georgia, this is probably a conversation that every SEC school has.
By the way, out of those offensive linemen, some of the top guys you mentioned, Broker, James, Mason Brooks transfer.
Yeah.
Uh, who has the highest ceiling in the as far as an NFL prospect? Do you believe?
Ceiling, it might be James. The guys that are probably a you know a safer pick today, probably Brooks and Broker. But look, Jeremy's moved from right tackle to left tackle. This will be, he's stepping into the kind of the main role of the show here. So people are going to be watching, and he's got the frame and all of that stuff. So he'll get a long look from NFL people. I think all three of those guys will play in the league.
All right. Moving on over to the defensive side of the ball. And once again, a lot of key transfers are going to come into play. Troy Brown is definitely one of them. And is he the biggest addition on defense?
He's one of them. They've got a bunch of guys in the defensive secondary that have transferred in. A freshman named Davison Igbenison from New Jersey, who is a corner who has looked terrific in camp. They've got Ishim Young, who transferred in from Iowa State, kind of playing safety. Ladarius Tennyson transferred in from Auburn. He's kind of playing. They list him as a safety, but he's almost playing a linebacker spot. You mentioned Troy Brown. Jaden Ivey, transfer from Georgia Tech, is a defensive end that they really want to get something out of. So I don't know that I'd say Troy's the guy, but he's certainly one of the guys. Linebacker for them is a bit of a question mark. They lost Chance Campbell. They lost Mark Robinson, who was terrific last season, plays for the Steelers now. Replacing those two guys that really never left the field, it's the biggest challenge they have on the defensive side.
Yeah, because not only, even though you bring in a couple of interesting transfers, Young and Brown, they haven't been here, so it's a completely different, whether it's a system or environment, whatever the case may be, it's new. And no matter how good or talented they might have been with the previous stops, it may look good on paper. You say, hey, Brown, look at this. He was one of the best linebackers in the MAC, and all that stuff is nice, but it's still new. And and so it's important that people do understand that. You don't get, sometimes, like you said with the quarterback, sometimes you get overly excited too about the new players, and you don't realize how much you lost from guys who were instrumental in those specific spots like linebacker.
Yeah, Lane's talked a lot about this, about, you have to build culture. This is a preseason camp where you have 18 grad transfers, maybe more than that by the time you get through, not grad transfers, transfer portal guys. He made the comment, and I was right. I was watching the play that he was talking about. It was right in front of me. There was a play in a practice just the other day where you had a wide receiver who played at Mississippi State last year being guarded by a defensive back who played at Auburn last season. And you look at that, and those are two guys that played for SEC West rivals just one season ago, less than 12 months ago. And you're like, this is, like he said, this is the world we live in now. It's different. And so, you have guys that come in from different programs, and most guys left for a reason. Some guys, like Troy Brown, left because they wanted to play at a higher level, and Mason Brooks, they wanted to advance their resumes professionally. And then you have guys that, like Ladarius Tennyson, who left Auburn because probably was trying to find a place where he could get more playing time. You have guys that left programs because coaches left and they didn't feel comfortable with the new coach. You have guys that left because things weren't working out. I mean, there's different things. And so it's not always, like you said, it's not always like, oh, look at these 18 guys transferring from these other programs. It's going to, oh, wow, look at all this talent. Yeah. Boom, this is going to work. Not always.
Not always, no.
And I think a sign of that is if you look at Ole Miss's recruiting already for this next class, I think they've already somewhat shifted a little bit from going transfer heavy to going back into the high school guys. And some of that is because they had some success, and it made them more attractive to young guys. And some of that, and you can't convince me otherwise, Lane would never admit this, nor should he. But some of that is because you realize that, you know what, blending all of these cultures, blending all these families is not always that seamless.
No.
It's not as easy as it is bringing in a bunch of guys from high school And, guy leaves high school. I don't care how great of a high school player he was. When he shows up in college, he knows, okay, I gotta put my work shoes on. I gotta go to work. I mean, I got a lot to do. Sometimes with transfers, they come in going, I know how this is done, man.
Yeah,
I know how to do this. We did this way at State U.
sure.
This is how we do it. And you have to kind of break them out of that and get them into, no, this is the way we do it here. And that's not always as seamless as it typically is with the high school kid. With the high school kid, the problem is, he's not physically ready, or maybe he's not quite as mature as we need him to be, or maybe he's a little homesick, or maybe he's just having to learn how to work this hard because high school football was easy for him. You can work through those things. People have worked through those things for years, right? But this transfer portal thing is new. And it's not like the old transfers where you transferred and you had that year where you were on the scout team and that kind of humbled you, and maybe by the time you got around to playing again, okay, do whatever you want me to do. I just want to play.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of being on a scout team. This is new stuff.
Yes.
This is territory.
Hey, man, I transferred to play.
Yeah, well, and I transferred to play, and I transferred with an NIL deal,
Yeah.
and I'm making more money here than any of you cats who played.
Yeah.
And that leads to some locker room stuff, and I don't think there's any question that that's happened at Ole Miss, and I bet I would dare say that it's happened at a bunch of other places.
Yeah. To me, I think it's like free agency in the other sports, where in the beginning it appears fun and this is exciting, but coaches understand. You know what? I think it's better if we just draft our own guys or recruit our own guys, mold those guys, and if we need to use free agency, if we have a little extra money this year, we'll go out and spend it. If we have an opening at quarterback and we have a guy that wants to come here, and I'd rather have that proven quarterback instead of somebody that I'm not even sure if he's going to be a really good starter for us, I'll go after him if I have to. But I think that's where it's going to go. I think in time, a lot of these schools are going to realize that recruiting is a lot more important than the transfer portal.
Well, and in pro sports, right, free agency is earned.
Yes.
Like, I'm a big Cubs fan. Like, at the end of this season, Wilson Contreras is a free agent. Well, Wilson Contreras has been in the Cubs organization since like 2017. He has 6 years of major league service.
Yes.
So let's say he signs with the Mets, as an example. If he signs with the Mets, well, he will be accepted pretty much instantly in the Met clubhouse because they respect him as a guy who's earned his stripes as a major leaguer. When you do this transfer portal thing, you may have like Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart played like 6 games at USC. I mean, people talk about guys like Dart and Trigg like they spent 4 seasons at USC. They were there for a semester.
Yeah. The one that we were talking, we were previewing I think it was, we were talking Power 5 yesterday, and we brought up Daniel's name. And it's like, this kid is like, all he does is transfer. He's a 5-star, and he transfers here. He's from Georgia, and he transfers here, and he's going to be the big guy. And it's just, now he's transferring somewhere else, and it's, he's going to be the big guy there.
Yep.
He hasn't proven it yet, but that's the thing. And I also do believe, like you said, it does cause potential issues in the locker room as well, because if you have a kid that's maybe been there and he knows the majority of that locker room, and then someone comes in and wants to take his job that hasn't proven himself, that could cause some issues. It's possible.
Sure, of course.
Okay. Lastly, on defense, can you tell me what's the strength of the defense? What unit?
Yeah, it's the secondary. They've got a lot of depth back there. AJ Finley's been in the SEC for a long time, and it keeps getting better. I mentioned Davison Igbonison. Tysheem Johnson was terrific as a freshman. He looks like he's taken another step. They have just a myriad of safeties that they can play in different ways that have different strengths. I love Miles Battle at the other corner, big 6'3" corner that was a former wide receiver. Moved him around. It looks like he's really found a home. I tell this anecdote. At Ole Miss's Pro Day back in, I guess that was March, I don't remember. The Carolina Panthers staff, Matt Rule and all those guys were here, keeping a really close eye on Matt Corral, who they eventually drafted in the 3rd round. And Matt Rule kept coming over and talking to Miles Battle, who was just standing there watching pro day, and they knew him from when Matt Rule was coaching at, I guess, at
Okay.
Baylor, and he had recruited Miles out of high school. Miles is a Texas kid, and they were talking and that kind of thing. But you could tell there was more interest. And I remember I was 10 feet from Matt Rule, and he brought over one of the Panthers coaches, and he goes, "Hey, here's that corner I've been telling you about." And the coach looks at him and says, "You're tall for a corner." And Battle is a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if he's the guy, one of the guys that really nobody's talking about, that at the end of the season, because of his skill set, because of his body, because of his versatility, if he's a guy that is getting some really heavy NFL looks.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to give me a couple of players that may not have name recognition nationally just yet, but you think could do it this year. It could be a breakout year, and Battle appears to be maybe on top of the list.
Yeah, he's way up there. The other one would be a defensive end, Cedric Johnson, who got really overshadowed by Sam Williams last season, and understandably so, because Sam was terrific last season. But Cedric's up to 270. This is his junior year. It's his third year as a starter in the league. He's obviously going to get a lot of attention from opposing offensive coordinators as they get ready for Ole Miss this year. And if he can handle it and continue to play at the level that he's played, he's up to 270 pounds, has an NFL body, a pretty explosive, very smart kid. He's a guy that I think the NFL would be super intrigued by. Now, whether he comes out early or not, I don't know, but he's a guy, if he had a really good season, would have a decision to make.
Okay. And any breakout potential players on offense?
I mean, breakout is I don't know if Zach Evans counts as a breakout guy. Zach's the guy that could have a really good season and put himself on the NFL radar right now. I think.
Well, hey, you mentioned Jenkins. You're really high on Jenkins and Robinson.
Yeah, Jenkins is the guy I was going to. Judkins is the guy I was going to mention.
Judkins, yes.
Yeah, he's a guy that could have that big time freshman season where maybe Evans goes pro, and going into next season, Judkins is a guy that people are really talking about around the country.
Okay. And lastly, I want to ask you because you've given me a couple of players already, but 2023 NFL draft. Can you give me a couple of players who you think might be at the top of the list for Ole Miss football?
Yeah, it's Evans. It's probably Nick Broker, Jeremy James, Mason Brooks, that offensive line group. It's potentially Jonathan Mingo. I think it's all about his health. It's potentially Malik Keith. I think it's he's a guy that did not thrive in the Mike Leach air raid system, who I think has a better, and this is not knocking Mississippi State or Mike or anything, just the offense that they run, it limits guys like Malik. And this offense that Ole Miss runs, I think, highlights his skill set better. Now he's got to go deliver, and if he does, I think he's a guy, because of his body and his speed and his explosiveness, I think he could emerge as a guy that the NFL is really interested in. And look, if Jalen Robinson can even remotely put up the kind of performance numbers that Elijah Moore did, and even remotely looks similar to what Elijah looked like in Lane Kiffin's offense, he's a guy that, obviously, because of his speed and the way that the NFL game has evolved, where they use the slot so much more than they used to, I think he's a guy that NFL people will definitely be watching.
All right, schedule-wise, the first 3 games, very manageable. Actually, the first 4 games look manageable.
Yeah.
Then comes Kentucky at homecoming, which should always be tricky. Homecoming's always tricky, and that's a tough opponent. But overall, it would not be a shock if they were able to beat Kentucky on October 1st. And Auburn is also at home. They got Auburn and Kentucky, the 2 toughest games early on are at home. That it's possible that they could be sniffing in like an undefeated record heading to either LSU or Texas A&M if everything goes well.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the first 4 games are non-league games. The toughest one's at Georgia Tech. I mean, you've got to figure Ole Miss is going to be a 14, 17-point favorite in that game. They get Kentucky at home, like you said. Then they go to Vanderbilt, which is a game they should win, obviously. And then they come home again to play Auburn. I think Ole Miss would be favored against Auburn, though Ole Miss does not typically beat Auburn. It just doesn't really matter. Auburn dominates that series. I don't know that that matters,
Okay.
but they have. I mean, there's been like Lane Kiffin has not beaten Auburn yet. Lane Kiffin has won a bunch of games at Ole Miss in 2 years, and he hasn't beaten them.
Okay. Hey, I was going to ask.
You know,
Remember, I was going to ask you that handicapping question. You've answered it.
but look, could they be 7-0 going to LSU on the 22nd of October? Sure. But then, man, their schedule gets brutal from there. I mean, at LSU is a brutally difficult game.
Yes.
I mean, everybody talks about, LSU and how bad they were a year ago and all that stuff. Well, the knock on LSU a year ago was how disorganized they were, how dysfunctional they were. Well, under Brian Kelly, they won't be
that's
disorganized.
Right. Yes.
They won't be dysfunctional. Yes. Now, I don't know. I'm not saying Ole Miss can't win that game because I think it can. And then it depends on what you think about Texas A&M, but that game's going to be in College Station. That's difficult. They come home, get a weekend off, and then they get Alabama at home. I think Alabama is clearly the best team in the country. I don't even think it's close. And then Ole Miss has to go to Fayetteville. That'll be Arkansas Senior Day. Assuming health. It's so hard to predict the November game in August, but Arkansas has a third-year starter at quarterback in KJ Jefferson. They've got both coordinators back for the third straight year. Sam Pittman's done a really good job with building that program's culture. It's hard to win in Fayetteville. Ole Miss typically does not do well in Fayetteville. So that's a tough game, and then they'll come home on Thanksgiving night to play a Mississippi State team that figures to be desperate by then because State has lost 2 in a row to Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl. It is not well received in Starkville to lose 3 in a row to Ole Miss, so they'll be dialed in for that. So, Ole Miss could make a lot of hay early and then struggle late, or they could get a lot of momentum early and go into some of those games that look like difficult games or look like losses on the schedule in August, and momentum changes the way that those games feel. So, it remains to be seen. And then on the flip side, if you're going to do the super optimistic thing, and this is where fans get mad at me, you have to do the negative side. And the negative is you lose to Kentucky, who I think is going to be really good. You lose to Kentucky, you lose to Auburn, and you are 5-2 at the turn.
Very tough schedule ahead.
With those 3 brutal road games and Alabama, and suddenly you're a 6-6 team. So, I've covered this league for a long time. I covered Auburn for 6 years. I've essentially covered LSU for a couple of years. I've covered Ole Miss now forever, and the margin between 6-6 and 9-3 can be super slim, and I think that's the case for Ole Miss. If you told me Ole Miss went 10-2, I'm not shocked. They've got the talent to do it. They've got the schedule to do it. If you told me they went 6-6, I'm not shocked either. And so if people say, "What do you pick?" I'll pick in the middle of that. I'll go 8-4.
All right, sounds good. Prediction. And Neal, I appreciate it. By the way, McCready, nationality?
Yeah. I would assume
Irish.
we are like Scotch Irish or something way down the road.
Like it. I thought it was McCready. Everybody must think that McCready.
Yeah, I've gotten my answer to that too, but it's McCready.
Yeah, it's McCready. Yeah, at least that's what you think. But I'm sure it's your name. You know better than anybody. And lastly, before I let you go, because I would think a lot of people start interviews talking about Kiffin. How's this going? How's the relationship going
with him in the school? They love him. He's the brand. His daughter moved to Oxford for her senior year of high school this summer and wanted to get a dog. And so they bought a Labrador Retriever. And everybody loves Labrador Retrievers. I have 2 Labrador Retrievers. Labrador Retrievers are the best dogs in the world. And they got a dog. Her name is Landry. And so Landry got a dog, and they named the dog Juice. And Juice has basically become Ole Miss's mascot. So, Ole Miss people love Lane. And I think as much as Lane's not a touchy-feely guy. Lane is not a guy that probably walks around with his emotions on his sleeve much. I mean, he's pretty aloof. But I think Lane is warming to Oxford, to Ole Miss, to the fans a little bit. the end of every season, they're always like, okay, well, he's going to leave for this
Yeah, I
place.
know.
And I keep telling people, like, I'm not naive. I mean, is there a world where Lane Kiffin leaves? Of course, but we've built this narrative about Lane Kiffin leaving on one thing. He left Tennessee after 1 year, but he left Tennessee to go to USC, which was his dream job. Okay, so it didn't work out, and he had to take a step back. They fired him on the tarmac and all that stuff, and he had to do the Nick Saban thing. And then he went to FAU, and he stayed at FAU for 3 years before he got the Ole Miss job. And now he's going into his third year at Ole Miss. He's making $7.5 million a year. They're doing for him pretty much whatever he wants within reason. So, and they've made him the brand. And so when people say, well, Lane Kiffin's going to leave first chance he gets, my response to that is always, okay, but how many schools out there fit that Venn diagram of they'll pay $8 million plus a year, they'll give him basically whatever he wants for his staff, for his support staff, analyst, and all that, and they'll make him the brand, the whole brand. Yeah. I mean, the answer to that is not many. Not many schools. Like, is Ohio State a better job than Ole Miss? Yes. Would Ohio State pay more than Ole Miss? Sure. Is Ohio State going to make Lane Kiffin the brand?
No.
No. Auburn. Is Auburn a better job than Ole Miss? Probably right now it's kind of debatable, but probably sure. Is Auburn going to make Lane Kiffin the brand? Are they going to make him the brand over tradition and the Auburn family and the Creek and the Eagle? And I don't think so. And so, it's a complicated calculus when you get into that. I think there's a scenario where he's gone quickly, and I think there's a scenario where Lane Kiffin's at Ole Miss for a while.
Yeah. I'd like to see that. I know a lot of other fans would. It's always better. It's tradition. That's what you want when you love college football. And we certainly hope so. It would be a nice marriage. And it's like you said, too, it's not always easy for someone like Kiffin to find the people that are backing him that actually like him as much as they do. I'm sure he knows that. So that's not easy. So
he'd be blind not to know it. So, yeah, and he's a smart guy. I'm sure he's aware that they fully embraced him.
Neal, you have a podcast of your own?
I have lots of
podcasts.
Yeah. The main one is called the Oxford Exxon Podcast. You can subscribe at YouTube on MPW Digital or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, so it's available on YouTube. I like that. Definitely have to link that up. Neal, I appreciate it. Again, I hope we get the opportunity to talk again. Maybe if we're lucky during the season, if things are going well. That would be nice. But again, thanks for stopping by and checking in with us.
You bet. Have a great weekend.